what I'm supposed to be doing in this session is showing you all some of the changes we've made to the editor for version 12.1 of Dyalog APL. I've no idea how long I'm going to take, so we may finish early. Hopefully, it's almost certain that we're not going to go over. What I thought I'd do is really just start off by showing you some of the problems that we have in version 12.0 that we're trying to address, and then go through the features in 12.1, showing you how we've addressed the areas that we certainly thought were most important. Some of the changes will be familiar to those of you that have used Visual Studio and editors like that. There are other things that we will certainly be able to do given the changes that we made so far. As Morten mentioned earlier, large parts of the editor have been rewritten. So we've got scope to make additional changes later. So this is almost a first raft of changes that we can now make, and we can extend further as we go on. I've got no PowerPoint. I'm just going to stand here and type if I can multitask to that extent. I'm used to sitting down and typing. Standing and typing is going to be something of a chore. Hi. I can. I don't want to go too big because I'll run out of what I can actually show you. So, and feel free to shout out any polite questions as we go on. So I'm just going to go through stuff and just type. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to load a workspace called Parser, which is one that I've just for some reason picked up as a demo workspace. It contains a class in it which doesn't contain too much stuff. It's one that Dan Baronet wrote at some point. I don't know what it does. It rather coincidentally turned up on the cover of the Dyalog 25-year little book that we had as well, which was just a complete coincidence. Anyway, so if I load this workspace and paren add parser, okay, what we see here is an APL class. It's a class called parser, and it contains, where's my mouse gone? It contains a number of variable definitions and field definitions. There's a function there called init. Sorry, I'm just struggling to find my mouse. There's a function there called switch, and a function underneath called parse. So it's a fairly straightforward class. It's got 3 or 4 functions in it, and some, I don't know, a couple of hundred lines, I suppose. Right, so one of the things that I'm quite likely to do, if I close down the editor on this class now, is I might want to look at the source for that switch function that was in there. So I'm likely to I'm likely to type something like paren add parser.switch. Now remember, this is 12.0. When I hit enter on here, what we get is an empty window expecting me to fill in the body of the function called switch. Clearly, what I wanted to happen was I wanted to see the switch function that already existed within there. The fact that you can't do that in 12.0 is largely my fault, because I had a mental aberration and decided that wasn't what you wanted, but clearly I was wrong. Well, we'll come to that when we come to 12.1, but that's not actually relevant, because when you're editing, you're in a developer mode, so the public-private doesn't come into it. You want to look at the thing. Okay, so that's your first problem, is if you want to look at a function that already exists in your class, you cannot. Okay. Next thing I'm likely to want to do is maybe add a new function. So parser.new, for example, paren add that, I get the same thing. I'm not able to easily, with the editor, just add a new function to my existing class. And it's, again, clearly, well, I've done one of two things. I've either spelt something wrong and I want to edit something that existed, or I want to add a new function to the class, given that I've typed paren add parser.new. So those are a couple of things that are clearly unhelpful. Hi.
It doesn't think that parser is a namespace?
What it's actually trying to do here is edit a thing called new inside the parser namespace, rather than adding it to the class definition that I've already got. Okay. Let me load another class here. This is something that came from Adrian Smith. He won't mind because he's not here. What I've got in here is a class called Coup, which, to be fair, has been created dynamically. It's got 25,000 lines in it. It's not all been typed in. Adrian has taken an existing application that he had and generated a class script from it. But it's a large thing. If I paren add Coup, again, this is in 12.0. First of all, what's happened is we have no syntax coloring, and in fact we've got a window that's popped up to say this class has too many lines to syntax color. Okay, so this thing is so big that 12.0 has not been able to syntax color it. Clearly that's not ideal. And if I put line numbers on this guy, okay, if I scroll down, if I can find my mouse, if I scroll down, when we get to about 9,999 lines, oh, I'll tell you what I could do. I could do edit, go to line 9999. There you see, once we get from 9999 to 10,000, the line numbers start going awry, let us say. Now, to be fair, I mean, you know, and I think the reason for this is, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe there is a limit of 9,999 lines in a function. Is that correct? Oh, it's even smaller than that. Clearly, you're very unlikely to have a class that's this large, let alone even a function that's this large. But the problem exists if you're editing a large data, a large variable. You know, its line numbers are also going to go wrong once you get past 9999. So there's a couple of issues there with editing large things that we want to address also. And the other thing that I'll just point out here, or you'll probably not notice, is if I scroll this window down to the bottom, and then I use the mouse wheel to start scrolling around, the response is, it's not really showing it, the response is a little bit slow when we get down towards the bottom of functions. And in fact, when we do searches within the text here, that sort of slows down as well when the text gets much larger. So those are some of the issues that we wanted to address in the editor as we went from 12.0 to 12.1. If anyone wants copies of my handouts, they're welcome to take a biro and a piece of A4 and knock themselves out. And as Morn said earlier, you know, there's still some time left in the beta program for 12.1, so if anyone wants to get hold of the editor to play with it or see what's going on, if I miss anything, then by all means get in touch and we should be able to get a beta version to you. So, let's come out of 12.0. And let's come to the all singing, all dancing 12.1. I think that font is already the same size that I was using in 12.0. So, let's see what's new. Let's load this SP12 workspace again. In fact, no, let's not load that one. Let's load the parser workspace first. Let's go through the solutions in the order that we went through the problems. Okay, so now, if I paren add parser.switch, the editor opens up and takes me to the definition of the switch function in parser. Clearly, that's what we would have wanted. Okay, so the surprises were in what 12.0 did, not in what 12.1 is doing now. If I paren add parser.new, okay, what happens is the editor now has determined that there's no function called new in there and has given me an empty function called new. When we're defining a class, we use the dels to delimit the start and end of a function. So it's given me a default empty function within the class script. So, which is essentially what the editor was trying to do in 12.0, except it didn't need the dels because it was just editing a standalone function rather than the text within the class. And we'll just put some stuff in there and we'll fix that thing. Okay, now what I didn't do in 12.0, so let's just go back quickly and do that. Let's load parser again. This is a class, and in Dyalog 12, when we want to create an instance of the class, we use something called quad new. So quad new parser, okay, and I need to give that an argument. If I trace into this, it's going to create a new instance of the parser class, and it's going to trace into that function called init, which was in the class definition. And if I trace into that, what we've got here, the tracer down at the bottom, we're only seeing that single function called init. We've lost all the context of the other functions that were defined in the class. Okay, so we're back to looking at a very partial view of our class rather than the whole thing. If we do the same thing in 12.1, quad new parser quote, when we get into the tracer here, now again we see the whole class, so we can scroll up and down, look at our whole class definition, but the init function, which is the function that we're currently interested in, the function that we're tracing, is highlighted in the normal trace colors that you've been using in Dyalog APL for many, many years. And if I use Shift-Enter now, for example, and add a call to that function called new that I defined earlier, hit Escape to fix those changes. If I now trace into this call on new, then we see that the black highlight shifts to the function that I'm now within, and I can do Enter, Enter, and then we come back to where we left it in the init function. So again, the idea is that we're editing and we're tracing our class as an entity, which is how we initially wrote it because we generated that part as a script. Right, now, while we've got this tracer up, Morten, if you were watching Morten's presentation earlier, you would have noticed that when Morten was tracing into his function, he actually had syntax colors in the tracer. And in fact, that's an option that I've disabled at the moment because I was going to reveal it magically in all its glory. If I go to the colors dialog box and check the option that says show me syntax coloring in the function tracer, and I hit the OK button, now we get the same syntax coloring in the tracer that we had when we were editing the function. The difference also, of course, is that the solid red line that we had that indicated the line that we were currently on when we were tracing has now become the red rectangle, so we don't lose any of the information that we had in the syntax coloring. And of course, the areas above and below the function that we are currently tracing are using the same color scheme, but they've sort of been dimmed a little bit to indicate that they're not the current active function. Okay, so that's the tracing side of things. Syntax colors in the tracer. The tracer now shows you the entire class definition rather than just the one function that you're looking at. Let's load the large class again, and we'll paren ed coup. Okay, now we can see that now the syntax coloring is correct. We've got an entirely new syntax coloring engine in 12.1. It's much quicker than it was before, and clearly it can handle much larger objects as well. So this is the coup function. The coup class. If we scroll down through this, you'll see there's a function called getType, a function called toString, a function called addAttributes. There are obviously in sub 25,000 lines a large number of functions defined in this class. And if we come down to lines greater than 9999, you can see now, phew, we can live and breathe again. We've now got the line numbers correct when we go into the fifth digit of the line numbers. But what we've got in here clearly is we have this class which is an immense thing. It's going to be difficult to navigate through it. It's going to be difficult to find the functions that we want to look at and so on. So we want to, again, make it easier to navigate through these large classes and large functions and so on. Okay, now, having shown you that the line numbers were incorrect when we got past 9999, of course it's not particularly helpful that when we're editing these functions, for example the toString function here, what we used to thinking of as line 0 and line 1, actually we've got line 8, 9, 10 and 11 by them. That's not particularly helpful. But if I switch, why did that go over there? There. Okay, let's come in again. Okay, if I switch line numbers off, okay, and come to the view option here and select the function line numbers option, what we get now is we get our line numbers delineated just on a function by function basis. Okay, so now when we're editing this thing, we can type branch to 3. We don't have to do the arithmetic to figure out, oh God, which line 3 is it? You know, it's there for us. Well, no, I mean, when you're, for example, if you're editing, well, it was wrong. I knew it was there. No, but again, I mean, as far as those line numbers were concerned, if you're editing a large matrix of data, that similarly would have gone wrong at 9999 as well. Well, not right. Line number 3 now will take me to, oh, hold on. If I go to line number 3, that will take me to the line within the script, not the line within the current function. Okay. I suppose the assumption would be that if you're in a function like this addAttributes one, and you your function's too big if you can't go to line 3 by hand, I suppose is what I'm going to say. But I mean, but there may be an argument for saying take me to line 3 of this function. That actually is perfectly reasonable and certainly hadn't occurred to me before. And if it had occurred to anybody else, they had been politically quiet about it. But we can certainly add, as we go through, if there are any suggestions about why doesn't it do this, or couldn't it do that, or couldn't it do such and such in a slightly different way, do feel free to shout them out, and we'll.
That's really good.
What?
It exists a line on the function.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it never occurred to me actually until the question came up. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll be organised. I had to start sometime. I'll just make a quick note, because that'll eat up some time as well, and then we'll be fine. Okay, so go to line number in function. Has anyone else noticed, having used computers for 20 years, you can't write anymore? My handwriting is shot. It's so I'm writing it down, but I'm not going to be able to read it again. Okay, so can I get a bowl of water? Lackeys. Thanks, sir. Right, where were we? Yeah, I've done that one. Right, okay. So function line numbers, okay, that's fantastic. But we've still got this problem. We're navigating through our large class with 200 functions or whatever, all a bit difficult. It would be nice if we had a quick way of saying, I want to look at that switch function again, or I want to look at that parse function again, or I want to look at the toString function again. Let's bring up the next change that we've made. Let's do view, tree view here. And what that gives me, to the left of the text, is a tree view. And if I drop down the methods section, okay, what I get here is an alphabetical list of the functions that are defined in my class. So I can add attributes, for example, takes me to that function. If I click on add bubble bar, takes me to that one, and so on. If I use the cursor keys just to move down, I can scroll through and go through all of my functions. If I type T0, not T0, TOS, oh wait a minute, you've got to do it, it times out, you've got to do TOS quickly. There's the toString function. Okay, so you've got this easier navigation of getting through your functions in your class. The argument's all a bit circular. We've insisted that you edit your class as an entity, which means it's got bigger, which means we now need to, make it easier for you to navigate through it. But I think it's better. So what else have we got in the tree view? We talked about our methods. In this class, there are a number of fields defined. We can go through those in the same way. Constructors. I mentioned earlier that when we created an instance of the parser class, that would call a function called init. The reason it called that function was because in that class there was a function called init that was defined as being the constructor function for the class. In this class we've got two, one called create and one called create default. If I go to create, it's actually just there. There we can see that this is the statement that indicates that this is the constructor function for this class. And I can click on create default, and that will take me to take me to the appropriate line in the class. Yes. There are a number of properties in here as well, and the same thing works there. There's this interesting thing here at the bottom, which is a thing called sections, which currently has got no entries in it. But the purpose of kernel sections is to allow me to arbitrarily group together related elements of my class. So, for example, or namespace. So, example here, if I type colon section constructors, okay, and down here I do colon end section, okay. Then down now over here I can now go directly to that section. So I can navigate, I go to that guy, I can navigate to an arbitrary function where I may be doing some work. Okay, and then I can easily go back to my area in my class where I define my constructors. You can pretty much put that colon section anywhere you like. You can put it in a function, you can put it in a class script, you can put it in a namespace script. It's just a useful little way of grouping stuff together. I think you can put it in a function. It might not be allowed in a function, so It was a time ago. Sorry? Well, you're right. The end section, I suppose, there is largely redundant because all it goes to is well, yes and no. It's largely unimportant. But now you've mentioned that, let me come to the next point. Actually, it is important. No, it's good because actually, if I'd thought of using that as a little segue, I would have used it. So thank you for that. Right now. This is all very well and good, but we've still got 25,000 lines of stuff that's there that we've got to look at. So let me bring up the next little thing that's in the 12.1 editor. Let's bring up what we call outlining. Okay, so that's brought in another column in the editor, vertical lines and these minus signs. Now what happens now is if I wobble my mouse over one of these little boxes, I get a highlight to indicate what that level of outlining is, and if I click on it, it collapses that section down. So that's why the end section is there. Okay, so you can see, for example, I can collapse a property. Up here we've got a function called delta underscore VTM. I can collapse that down. If we look in here, there's a colon if section, which I can collapse down as a separate entity. I can close the whole thing, and it remembers the state of the things inside. If you use Visual Studio, you will be familiar with this sort of outlining. Yeah. It remembers the state of all of those. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's come up to the top of the script again. Just checking my borrowed notes. Blah 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 blah. Yeah, okay. So in my menu now, I've got a collapse all outlines menu option, which just drops everything down. So I can now just open the functions that I'm particularly interested in. If I come over to my methods again, then the navigation works the same way. There was a question, I think, about whether or not it should automatically open a section when you navigate to it. Okay, and clearly it doesn't do that, but it's trivial to open the thing up once you've navigated to the appropriate function. Okay, and you can see actually when an area is collapsed, when I hover over it, we get that horizontal box now to indicate that this is the section that is going to be affected by clicking on the thing. Now the other thing that we can do with these sections, which is sort of useful, perhaps, is if I've got the cursor on a line of code which is at the beginning of one of these outlines, then there's a keystroke to move to the other end. So Control-Shift, I thought about it, M for match. Control-Shift M doesn't do anything. Oh. Oh, no. Yeah. Do what, sorry?
Press +1.
+1? Well, let me just... I don't know where it's gone. Hold on, let me do it on exactly the function that I did it on before, because I'm slightly confused. Let me try it on toString. Right, so we're on there, Control-Shift-M. I wonder if I've not actually defined the key. Let me show you how I define those keys, just in case you're not aware of that. If on the top right-hand corner of the language bar, there's a little picture of a keyboard. If I click on that, that allows me to specify here the various keyboard shortcuts I want for various options. And the top one is actually go to matching outline, which clearly is Control-Shift-M. Toggle outline is Control-Shift-O. So let's go there. Control-Shift.
Press the key now. It is moving it.
Exit the...
It is moving it. It's just not showing the cursor up.
Let me just... Right, okay, there you go.
It works only when the cursor is on the left.
No, I'll tell you what it is, and we'll address this when I get back. I had the methods thing open, and I suspect what it was doing is refreshing that all the time, which it clearly doesn't need to do because all it's doing is moving the cursor. Anyway, so if you're on a line that is at the beginning of an outline, Control-Shift-M moves the cursor to the corresponding end, okay? Which isn't fantastic perhaps when you're in a function, but if you want to go to, let me find something. Here, there's an if, for example. Not a very big one, but you could walk through your ifs and your ends and your cases and your end cases, not your cases, your switch and your end switch and your trap and your end trap, just to quickly navigate through those matched pairs. And that's Control-Shift-M, and of course Control-Shift... Sorry? Not parentheses, no. Well, hold on, you say that. No, not parentheses also. Again, no reason why. Yeah, Visual Studio does that too. Does it do that when you move the cursor next to it, or does it do it when you type it? Yeah. What we do, let me write both those down. Mo and highlight for parens. Okay, right, we'll do that. Right, so, and the other keystroke was Control-Shift-O for outline, and then what that does, that's just a keystroke to collapse and expand the particular section that we're talking about. Okay. Right, now, I'm going to change tack both very much and very little all at the same time. Over the past, for as long as I've been working on the product, I've been concentrating on the Windows product, and the changes that I've typically been making have been changes to GUI environments. And the Unix interpreters, especially those non-Unix interpreters, sort of have been left behind a little bit. And what we wanted to do with these editor changes was to sort of even the playing field a little bit. What I've got here, this is a Linux SUSE. It's actually a VM that's running on this machine, but it's a SUSE box. And in here I've got a non-GUI Linux APL, which I will start. Okay. So I mean, it's a session. It just doesn't have. It has a session. There's no GUI attributes on this because this is designed to run over a TTY or over a telnet session or something, and run remotely. So there's no GUI available on this. But I can load the same workspace that I had before. Okay, and I can paren ed coup as we had before, and we get an editor up, which is now syntax color. For the first time, the Unix interpreters have got syntax coloring as well in the editor. I can expand this window, and again, the keystrokes that I was using before can be used now to match those outlines there and to collapse the outline there as well. And another nifty thing, which is also in the Windows product, but I'll illustrate it here, is that I can now do something. I can do Alt Backspace, which is a keystroke to toggle a breakpoint. You'll see when I hit Alt Backspace, a little red dot that appears just to the side of the thing. That now set a breakpoint on that line in the function, so that if we run it, clearly it's set quad stop, so you can look at quad stop to see what it's done, and then the at runtime would stop on that line of code. And of course, we've got the function line numbers and all of that stuff now for the first time in the Unix interpreters too. So we're really trying to bring the development environment in the TTY versions, for those of you that are using those, forward as well. Put some new development into those, because they are important interpreters for those of you that are using them. Okay, so let's come home and go back to Bill. Okay, so there what we've got is we've got the number of things fixed in the editor. You type paren parser.switch, it takes you to the function that exists. You type paren parser.new, it will give you a new function in that class. Line numbers work, you've got your syntax coloring, you've got your outlining. Hopefully all of these things will make it easier for those of you that are editing classes and such like. Let me load another workspace. I'll pick one at random that I randomly picked earlier, so I knew it was going to do something. If we look at wdesign, wdesign.run, and we edit that, okay. the outlining also works in functions. Obviously there's no colon class, colon n class stuff in there, but we can still outline our colon ifs, our if there, for example, and so on. If I find functions that got switches in, I would do the same thing. I wish I hadn't used this workspace now because the character set is bizarre. Let me try another one. And again, this is a little segue that I was going to do that I thought I must remember to do that, otherwise I'm going to look stupid. And what's happened is I've looked stupid. Yeah, I mean, again, you know, there's no point in banging on about it. The outlining exists in your functions as well. So again, you can collapse the sections. You can use the Control-Shift-M to navigate your way past sections that you're not interested in. Yoho.
Did you also include the highlight and the function, like following the mouse?
No, and that was one of the things that was on the list of things you sent me, but no, not yet. But what's interesting about that is that's, it might not seem like it, but it's sort of related to the question about highlighting or making a single parenthesis bold. We haven't got a mechanism in the interpreter other than when you make a selection of emphasizing arbitrary bits of text. So the mechanism of highlighting a parenthesis when you moved over its partner would probably be similar to the mechanism of highlighting words to find other occurrences of this word in the text. Right, so yeah, so sorry, yeah.
Similarly, did you think about a column tree?
No. Yeah, I think that's more of a that's a workspace tool, I think, rather than an editor tool. And there is one.
There is one in one of the tools.
Okay, so we already have a tool that does that. It might be nice if we could integrate that into the editor, so you can say what calls me and who do I call and so on. So,
What doesn't get called, what never gets called.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so. Right, so in addition to syntax colouring functions and classes when you're editing them, let me show you something else that we've got in 12.1 which I think is useful. I'm going to load a workspace called Weather, and am I brave? No, I'm not. What I've got here is I've got some XML that defines the weather conditions at Newark at 9:51 local time this morning. Okay, this is an XML document, so if I use the new quad XML function, what I get back is a nested array which contains a numeric column, so a couple of text columns, and then in fact also an additional numeric column on the right. If I put this into a variable and then paren add XML, we are actually applying the syntax colouring to this nested array as well. Let me make that clearer by, for example, changing the syntax colour for numeric constants. Okay, so we can see that those columns in this array that are numeric are now displaying in green, as would a numeric constant in the editor. Okay, and those elements here, which are character constants, character vectors, are displayed in blue here in the same way that they would be if you put a quoted string into the function editor. Okay, so again, I can't edit this because it's a nested array, okay, but again, it's giving me a little bit more of a hint about what the types of things are within that array. Yeah?
For the class editor, where does that reside? The preferences that are defined as you edit something?
Right, most of those things are defined in this colours dialog box here. You can specify, what I was doing here.
No, I meant if you edit the function and you write the view of it, is that
Well, with the,
state somewhere, is it as a preference or with the function?
with the, you mean the collapsed areas of the outlining, or?
Well, the start, the way that you go in and you edit a function and you make a lot of changes from the default view.
Right.
Where you have a function the way that you like it to appear for editing.
Okay, no.
Most of the function, when you reopen it, you're going to see what you ended up with.
Yeah, let me go back to Q again. What I did with this example is I switched off all the extra features, and then I added them all on one at a time. So it's remembered that I want to see the tree view, and that I want to see the function line numbers, and then I want to see the outlining.
Is that specific to that class?
It's specific. No, it's specific to this type of object. So now all classes will show those columns. Okay, and all functions, for example, don't show the tree view because it's not relevant in a function.
You have one style that applies to any class.
One style that applies to any type of object. So there's a different style you can have for functions, a different style you can have for classes.
Right.
And it's all done transparent, it's all saved in the registry, but it's per type of thing that you're editing. Yeah, yeah? Okay, so what I wanted to just point out there was the was the syntax colouring for variables as well. Okay, right, now just for the last 5 minutes, but I'll stretch it out. I just wanted to move slightly sideways and just point out something that that is maybe useful to a number of you because of the changes that we've made to the editor, but are nothing to do with the editor. I'll take Alex's question first. Yeah, well, let's have a look. If the thing is defined in the class, it will go to the name in the class. So if I go to that parser workspace again, no, it wasn't parser, was it? It was coup. Let me load coup, because it had some fields in it, and I can't remember what any of them were called. So there was a field called false, for example. So if I do paren add coup.false and cross my fingers, it's taken us to that line as well. So it works for names that you've defined in the class, but any local variables that you've assigned or any variables you put in there at runtime, it won't work that way.
Another question is, some of the customers use
Right?
to expose internal functions.
Yeah.
So they also, if this internal function will be inside the class, customers will also see.
It's a good question. I know what the answer should be, but I suspect the answer might not be exactly that. Let me go back to parser because I know what the name of the functions are in it. So if I print CS into parser, it's probably the easiest way of doing it, and I do quad add switch was something, wasn't it? Yeah, it's done the same thing. Okay, I'll go here first. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, that's done. That's done. I'll tell you what that's done. That's because I'm in a different workspace, which is why it's done something very odd. But if I load that workspace again, it shouldn't have gone in parser anyway, I think. But so double click on coup.false, takes me to the same place. And in fact, if I double click, I didn't want to do this because I was going to click on something that didn't make sense. If I click on get baseline, it takes me to the get less baseline function. If I click on chabar limit, it takes me to the that suggests there isn't one, which possibly means that this class isn't complete and it relies on something else I haven't got. I've never run any of this, I'm just using it as text. Yep. Yes, but the problem is I'm not sure that may or may not work. Oh, God. Hey, I was 100% correct. Well, no, I was 50% correct because I sort of hedged it a little bit. Let's just try that again. So quad new coup. I've no idea what the what arguments the constructor takes. Okay, so that's gone. I've traced into that. I don't know if that's what you wanted me to do, but that's what I've done.
What I wanted to see was that you had something like c.false,
Yeah.
and then you try to edit the false, and you would go to the class.
Yeah, let's have a look. It depends on what type of thing false is, because if false was shared, let's just have a look, and then we'll go to false. Okay, so what that... Yeah, well, yes, probably, but what I would actually expect it to do is to go to an empty edit window with the current value of false for this instance in it, so I wouldn't expect that to go to the class anyway, because I might have done c.false gets...
If it was a function, then it should.
Yeah, let's just... I can't remember the names of any of the functions, despite... Oh, so I could do c.toString, for example, because I know that's there. Okay, no, you've got me. That's not doing anything. I'll look at that when we get back.
Do you have allocated time in history?
Sorry?
Do you have allocated time to history?
I have this week, I haven't right now. There was one other thing that I wanted to do. Was it directly related to this? And was it?
When you go into the task with the tracing,
Yeah,
and you come along a field which does exist at the time,
yeah.
it jumps to field definition.
Okay. All right.
I'm very unhappy.
No, I think you're probably right to be unhappy. Did you email me about that a couple of weeks ago?
The answer to that email was, we are considering a change.
We might have considered a
Which means no change at all.
Yeah, well, okay. I'll address that when I get back. Right, there was just one thing that I wanted to bring up, which is sort of related to the editor stuff, but is not actually anything to do with the editor as such. There's a whole new syntax colouring engine, okay, and in order for QAing and for various purposes, we wanted to have programmatic access to that information. And Morton mentioned very briefly this morning I-beams in Dyalog APL. I know none of the history of I-beams in any of the other APLs, okay, but my feeling, the way I think of I-beams is that they are sort of system-y functions, little hooks into the interpreter that may change as we develop the interpreter. They may come out, they may be extended, but they're sort of useful little hooks to get into the interpreter to do useful things. So one of these, the way we use an I-beam is, I-beam itself is an operator, so we give it a numeric argument to tell it what operation we want it to do. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to write simple defun. Okay, 200 I-beam, which does performs that operation on this array. Okay. And what if I just mix that? It's going to put extra zeros on if I mix it. But what that... My QuadML's wrong. Well, actually, for most of you, my QuadML was probably right. But I'm a mix man. I like my apparent to do a mix. What that is doing, well, that 200 I-beam, and if anyone who doesn't work for Dyalog comes to me with a reason why it's 200, I'll buy them a beer. Except that I can't. Such a shame. I'll tell you what, I'll lend you a beer and you can give me one back afterwards. Right, so what this has done is that it's extracted, it's parsed that text and returned syntactic elements about each of the characters that appears in that text. Okay, so if I do that, I wish I had a pointer, but Andy was going to bring it. What we can see here is, I'll duck and point, is that the word foo has got a syntactic number of 21 associated with it. It's a global name. A has got a value of 31. Semi's got a value of 19, and B has got 31. 31 means it's a local name. Okay, so this line of code ABC has a reference to a local name A, a local name B, and a global name indicated by the 7, C. Okay, so what's good about this is that if I had a function and I wanted to say quadrinar of build session, okay, do a 200 I-beam, wherever that returns a 7 to indicate that there's a global variable. Okay, that gives me all the global names that appear in that function. If I take the empties out, this is so well, you don't want to be standing up and typing, and unique it. Those are all the global references of that function. Okay, now I happen to know that 7 is global names, 123 is all the colon ifs. 128 is all the end ifs, and there's a value which is all the colon ifs that haven't been matched. So if you want to interrogate that and say to somebody, you've just fixed a function, or you're trying to commit a function with some invalid control structures in it, you can start hassling them. And you don't have to do any of the syntactic analysis because we're using exactly the same thing here in the iBeam that the editor is using to generate all that color information. And another nifty one is 23, which is idioms. How many idioms do I have in this function? And this function is using 4 idioms. It uses a concatenate idiom, the remove blanks idiom, the join idiom, and the that idiom. I know what it's doing. I just can't think of a sensible name for it. Which means that those areas of this function are optimized, which means that all these bits of my function need work. Because those are all the bits that aren't idioms. Anyway, so look at that on the dot. So that's what we've done. We've new syntax coloring engine, which means that we can edit larger things with coloring, which also means you've got this, I think, useful iBeam that you can use now to interrogate what your functions look like, and a bunch of outlining and other stuff that you can noodle with in the editor. Tony?
This is all great and way over my head, but I've got a kind of naive question here. I'm editing my function, I'm editing my object, and I fix it.
Yeah.
Has it produced the unit code file the way that Morton wants, or has it fixed it in the workspace the way God intended?
It will have fixed it in the workspace, and depending on whether or not you've enabled Salt, which is something that I think that Dan's given a presentation on later, it may or may not also have written a Unicode file. But it will certainly have fixed it in the workspace. It will always do that. Okay? Yeah, I didn't. Let me very quickly give an example of the refactoring. If I edit because it's very simple, we do very trivial refactoring because we wanted to get something out there and basically let people say, actually, this is what you need to do as well. If I edit a class and I do A gets 10, B gets 20, C gets 30, what I can do is I can select those areas of text. I can hit the plus M button at the top is refactor as method. Okay, and what I get here is the suggested text that's going to be inserted is this down here, which is the body of a function called getC, which has a local A and B. So it does the assignments to A and B, an assignment to C, which it then returns as the result. And with the grid at the top, I can modify what name is going to be the result, and it changes the text and so on. If I say, actually, C is not the result, but B is the result, okay, then the text changes to B. It's still called getC. I haven't changed that. I can change that in that field there. But when I hit OK, then we get the function inserted into the text, and the original lines that we had get replaced with an appropriate call to the function. Okay, so that's essentially, we can highlight names and say make this a field rather than a variable, or make this a property rather than a variable, but essentially it's doing a similar thing. It says, it tries to figure out, certainly the method case, which of the assignments you've done is the last one, and then it sort of gives you the option to say everything else is either a local variable or an argument to the function. Okay. Anything else? Quickly, because is it coffee now or is somebody waiting to speak? Oh, okay, so I could take another couple of questions then if people would prefer that than coffee. Yeah, I would have gone coffee as well. All right, thanks a lot. If there's any comments, questions, suggestions, or things that we shouldn't do or could do better, then come and talk to any of us over the next couple of days, obviously. Thanks a lot.